when I start off my African diaspora course, most people are just like, okay, if we're going to study Blackness or the African diaspora, it has to start with slavery. No, it doesn't have to start with slavery. We were people before slavery, and we've always been existing, before slavery, and we, had many civilizations. And not to say that all, the civilizations were kingdoms and, thriving in such a way. But, they were people, they were humans, just like everyone else around the world. Yet, we're not getting the same representation in terms of narrative. So I feel like my peak, my understanding or exploration also continued in my master's program in American Studies in Japan. So there I studied basically how foreigners were treated within the media. And so while I was there, I was able to do participatory research and see behind the scenes, how and when they would use Black bodies, or my own at the time, or different, or foreigners, within the media. And so seeing these different images, so sometimes I would apply for roles and I was able to receive certain positions as South African or as basically almost any ethnicity I was able to play. And but one time I received a response from an agent, and they're just like, you are not, basically you're not Black enough. and you're basically just a shade darker than like most Japanese people. And in my head, so it's just interesting because you get this idea of Blackness, and the same thing happened in Mexico. You think of yourself as super Black in different contexts, but then when you're contextualizing against different people, you may feel certain things in your head, but then in reality, it's a completely different thing. When other people tell you like, you're not that. And then I looked at the picture, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's totally right. But in my head, I'm like, same thing being socialized in Maryland, in my head, like I was, I've always been, I felt super dark and also felt, just Black in different ways. But then when I went to Baltimore, and there's like, oh, you're too light skinned, you're too this, or you're too proper. And so just seeing like how color and race or just ethnicity and just understanding your environment would change depending on the context. And I could apply that to any of the communities that I participated in, whether it be India, Brazil, all over the world. Same type of situation, different stories, different engagements. So I was raised in an Afrocentric household. What did that mean? It means I definitely understood that Africans had civilization, they've had civilizations, and indigenous people around the world also had highly civilized and highly advanced societies. And so why was it that the rest of the world did not understand this in the same way? I mean, we understand still that, the pyramids they're still trying to understand how the pyramids were created, and they still have no idea. So the sophistication and technology that was available in the past does not go with the narratives that are often perpetuated and continue to this present day. So this is, at Wayne State, when I was there as a senior lecturer, it was something that I would always start the semester off with, trying to understand or just basically position like what you think you understand of the world. Like if you really look at it architecturally and scientifically and through metallurgy, does not match up, because we're still trying to understand Machu Picchu and their civilizations. I mean, for me, I felt bad as a person that has been involved in indigenous cultures. Why did I not know anything about Cahokia? Why did I not, this is right in my backyard. The Native Americans that have been here, that have had flourishing civilizations even larger than Teotihuacan in Mexico. Why do we know nothing about them? And why do we only know about Mexico and other spaces? Even while visiting these spaces within Mexico, the people that are there now, often anthropologists will say, oh yes, these civilizations were created, but it's not by the Mayans that are here now, it's by another people. And so like really getting into this juxtaposition, and just kind of the influence of colonization and racial hierarchy and the construction of race has been it's just been fascinating to observe and witness. And so I feel like starting with the past is most important. Understanding the power and the the power of the storyline. I don't think most people would think of who's the richest person in history. You would most likely not think of an African person. So, but given the way that the country and the continents and just basically what I would, deem, what they used to call third world, most of these spaces are the richest in the world. So
I mean,
unfortunately.
Sorry to interrupt, but I often tell my, in conversation with friends, I said, it's not like the British went to India because they liked the weather and the mosquitoes and the diarrhea. They went there because it was a very, very rich country. And the same thing happened in Africa. It wasn't that it was, we're just going to go hang out with, and look around and it's the beaches and the weather. No, it was, I mean, they were there for an intent of pillaging. So, and this whole third world notion only came about much later, because because of what happened in the previous 200 years or so, to the notion coming up.
What happens when you basically, as Chimamanda Adichie talks about the danger of the single narrative, so trying to put basically Europeans at the top and everyone else at the bottom. And so when you have that and people are being colonized, and even in this contemporary times, people are still being colonized to think, one of my students the other day, I'm just, he was, Nigerian American, but just like, I cannot believe that I, really did not realize how much we've contributed to this world. And I was like, it's okay. We've all been colonized in our own ways, and we're trying to break out of it in different ways. And, so we're looking for ways, and knowledge and sharing information is one of the ways to break through the portrayals of erasure and the fake notions of European superiority, which is not true. I don't even like that term, actually. When they say white supremacy, I'm like, they're not supreme, so stop saying they're supreme. And in a way, when we're using that language, we're reinforcing, a certain type of thing. So, I mean, I've seen some scholars recently take out the white whole thing, just people who think that they are supreme. They're having a superiority or ego complex, and in certain ways. In the power of basically language, communication systems, religion, economics and politics, and media. For me, like, media is the main key. So, so the whole thing is basically moving towards understanding the dualities of colonialism. So, I mean, at the same time, they're propagating this whole idea of the colonial system and in a superior people, while at the same time they're doing barbaric things. Just look at the Kikuyu, just look all across the world, with the destruction and the inhumane ways that people within the third world, and even in the global north and global south, were treated by mostly Europeans, throughout the last 150 years. Just understanding that notion and the different ways of how even, in contemporary times, we're still doing these things. So how did they do it? They did it through literature. In our wonderful English canon, we often talk about the Heart of Darkness, the book by Joseph Conrad, who basically created this wonderful image of, and I'm being facetious, of Black people as barbarians and basically animals and not having identity and being heathens. And so you look at, like, the philosophers, you look through all these, and the periods of enlightenment, when are the dark ages? When we talk about historical time, when are the dark ages? The dark ages is when the Ottoman Empire or darker civilizations were ruling most of the world. That was the dark ages for, our history. So just really understanding nomenclature and how it interacts with our daily creating of this world and just, chronological order,
That's
and
an
even just the way
connection that you just made, the dark ages, which wasn't really about a fight between, dogma or fight between religions. It was really, I mean, if you take it further, it's that the darker races were actually, having a dominant play in world politics, if you would. I never made that connection, but it's fascinating. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, I know. I think it's funny. I'm like, of course. And then enlightenment is when we're being enslaved and colonized. So like,
yeah, no,
okay.
for sure. But yeah, there's a research paper that I wrote many years ago within architecture and lighting, is that when did darkness become bad?
Mm.
And basically shedding light on a topic which is comes up often. It's like, oh, that's going to look dark, and then darkness. I mean, my point was that that if you look at the Asian cultures, like writers like Junichiro Tanizaki from Japan, who wrote about In Praise of Shadows and Darkness, and he was really saying that there's such beauty in that. And then we come to the industrial West, and the industrial West wanted to chase out all shadows, all darkness. And there was a hidden, you're reading between the lines kind of a conversation there as well. It's like, how did that happen? When did we lose the heft of shadows and darkness and just make it like, let's just light it uniformly?
And just also kind of understanding. So, a lot of times people within certain communities like, okay, we got to go back to Africa. And right now that's actually, the huge Marcus Garvey, all the, many Pan-Africanists have desired, have had that desire. And some are actually doing, there's, this whole return to Africa and buy land and rebuild is beautiful. It's nice that I know that I can actually get a passport in Ghana, just by being an African-American citizen. So it's fascinating to see like how these changes are occurring in different ways. So anyway, it's good to see that certain things are changing, but still there's a long way to go, in different ways. So some of the whitewashing, I think we kind of brought up. So for me, as a Gaudiya Vaishnava, or a person that practices Bhakti yoga, I, am looking at images and, also just being raised in the West, I'm like, we know Jesus was not white. Why is he always depicted as white? So these are just some Google searches, and then I had an epiphany, like when I was like, thinking about like, gods or demigods in their positions also. And then I was just like, and I always talk about like Vishnu or Krishna, and I'm just like, Krishna is, Krishna literally means black. So why are we not seeing black images of Krishna nowadays? It seems like he's becoming lighter and also bluer and light blue and just disappearing in a way. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, what is going to happen? And the reason why I ended up showing like pictures of Ganesh is because literally I think I've only seen 1 or 2 images of Ganesh in a dark gray form. And I'm like, I know what an elephant looks like. I know what the color of an elephant looks like. Why am I not like, why have I had cognitive dissonance in terms of like thinking of a Ganesh as white? But I'm like, this is how it begins. Like you just see certain images and I talk this stuff all the time. Like it's, Jesus is, brown, hair of wool. What is hair of wool?
You get into trouble? You get into trouble? Let me guess.
Yeah. So, but when I didn't realize like really not understanding, I just, exploring those different things of how things are being changed, but why are they being changed? And why do we want the deities, or why do we want certain images of God or demigods to be white? It's because this whole idea of indoctrination of purifying the blood, or white is right and white is angelic, white is, supreme in different ways, which is completely the opposite spiritually a lot of times. So, which is in a way interesting.